All right, and now we are recording. All right. Want to mention to all of you before we start that we are coming up to the next, although it is minor, the next Jewish holiday. The next Jewish holiday coming up is this coming Friday. I know you'll say, is a holiday this Friday? Yes, there is. It's a minor holiday. It is called Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer in Hebrew simply means the 33rd day of the counting of the Omer. Some of you will probably remember, some of you may actually be taking part in a daily counting as I am trying to do. You're counting every day between the second night of Passover, the second Seder, all the way up to the holiday of Shavuot. If you are counting, that is 7 complete weeks, 7 weeks of 7 days, 49 days, 7 complete weeks. And the 50th day is the holiday of Shavuot, which ties the going out from Egypt, the exodus from Egypt, with the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. There is a tradition that some of us follow. You can tell by looking at me, I followed the tradition that you don't get a haircut or a beard trim or nails clipped or anything between Passover and Shavuot, except if you want on Lag BaOmer. So the reason that I'm looking like a lumberjack, my apologies to my wife, is because I've been trying to be diligent about not shaving or not taking a haircut. So I have already contacted my barber, and this coming Friday on Lag BaOmer, I've told her I want the works. Well, not ever the works. I'm not going to shave my beard, but I told her to be ready, and I will prepare myself up and get ready for the last 17 days of the holiday of the it's not week 7. I think it's week 9.
Can somebody help me out?
Will someone verify whether my wife is right? Is this week 9 or week 7?
You cut out for a bit there,
Oh,
Rabbi.
I cut out for a bit there. Is this week 9 or week 7?
I don't know.
No one knows. All right. Well, I am under the impression that this is week 9. Okay. But I could be wrong. I will pause for a moment. Paul, I see you looking it up, so I'm going to pause here. Again, I'm not in any rush this evening.
It's week 7. I can go back and look at the things.
It's okay. Paul or Joe, do you have is there a week schedule there?
I can look at the videos.
Well, this date would be on the original curriculum.
Yes.
This would have been week 8, but we did miss one.
Oh,
week.
right. We missed. Right. I missed
Okay,
one.
so Joseph, that would make it week what? 7?
It would be
Thank you.
week 7 if you subtract the week that we missed.
All right. Well, I missed the session, and I thank you all for allowing me to miss it. At any rate, I'm going to apologize in advance. Randy and I are going to, I'm apologizing for this, we're going to see our son and daughter-in-law and our grandson in Chicago. And we are leaving
a week from
Wednesday to spend a full week in Chicago. I have never been there, and thanks to Joseph and Howard and another couple of people who are aficionados and past residents and experts on the city of Chicago, I have got an excellent series of events planned. We're going to be there for a full week. We are not going, we're allowing 7 complete days to see everything we want in Chicago. Not that I won't go back again. I'm hoping that I love it and that I will go back again. But we are going to allow all the time that we need to see Chicago, including all of the city, the central city, north, middle, and south. We're even going to get to Skokie to see the Jewish area. So we're looking forward to that, which means and next week will be my last session with you before we stop. Okay.
So next week is 8.
Huh?
Next week is 8.
Next week is 8. Well, don't worry about what next week is. Next week will be the last session.
Completely?
Completely for the semester, yes.
Oh.
All right. I decided because of that to make a change. I'm going to mention a custom, and I hope some of you will recognize it. When you go to the synagogue and you read the Torah, you try and make your divisions in the 7 Torah readings that are read in each Shabbat, you try not to end on a dismal note. In other words, if you're going to make a break in the Torah reading, you never make the break after you've talked about something disastrous. That's considered very impropitious and unpropitious and not a good thing. If you're going to have to deal with a section of the Torah that is unpleasant, especially the two sections of the Torah throughout the year that deal with the curses that God has propounded or God has suggested for the Jewish people if they are not faithful, you don't interrupt those sections. If you come to one of those sections, you read it in its entirety, you don't divide it up, you don't put it over two readings. And generally speaking, you arrange the reading so that you always end on a positive note. You never want to end with tragedy. You never want to end with blessing, with curses or anything negative. Therefore, I have made the same decision with regard to this course. Originally, when I designed this course, I was going to cover what was called the ancient period of Jewish history, which we defined as the period from the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, all the way to the destruction of the first temple and the end of the Jewish kingdom at the hands of the Romans in the year 70, and the final dissolution in the following generation of all Jewish life, organized Jewish life in Palestine with the Bar Kokhba revolt. I realized that if I ended with that next week, I would be violating a cardinal principle of mine not to end on a negative note. I don't want to leave you till the next course brooding and being sad over the fall of Jerusalem. So what I have done is I've made it a little bit of a change. I'm going to end on a positive note. Tonight, I'm going to begin, and next week I will continue, and we will end on the note of the reestablishment of the Jewish state under the Hasmonean or the Maccabean rulers, okay? We will end on the reestablishment of Jewish life after the second exile period had ended, after the first exile period had ended, after the Babylonian exile. We will talk about how the Jews, after their return from Babylonia, finally were able, after a period of servitude and dependency and loyalty to other countries, were finally able to establish the independent kingdom of Israel. So we will end on a positive note. We will end with the reestablishment of the Jewish state, which will take us from 145 BCE to the period of 37 CE. Okay, you will have to wait, if you're really looking forward to it, to all the terrible events that happened, the Herodian period, the Roman period, the destruction. There's more than enough time to talk about the tragedies of Jewish life, but I couldn't in good conscience end by talking about the destruction of Jerusalem next week. I didn't want to do it, and there's no need to rush it. We have plenty of time to cover what we have to cover tonight. So just letting you know, next week, last session, we will discuss the Hasmonean dynasty, and it will take us from the year approximately 145 BCE till about the year 37 CE. So we will cover that period next time. All right, with that, I have something to share with you. I always like to share with you things, and hopefully, did you all get the notes and the videos from last time? My fault again. It wasn't Randy. Randy is blameless. I kept saying, "Don't send it out. Don't send it out. Don't send it out. I'm not ready yet." And once again, I blew it. I told her since that time, whatever I tell you, don't listen to me. Send out the videos as soon as they're ready. If I'm able to get any more information to them, I'll send it out separately. However, I did want to update one piece of information that I have shared with you. And with that, I'm going to begin. I'm going to do a share. Rand, I just hit share.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is one right.
I guess so. Is that one? Is it got the one next to it?
Yeah, one next to it.
Okay, and then hit share at the bottom.
Share. Okay.
Just give me a second.
Okay. This, can I get rid of this? All right. I'm hoping that everybody can see the time list. This is not a new time list. Don't think I go back and I change the time list every time I want to show it to you. I have updated it, however, because I want to show you the entire period of ancient Jewish history. So one more time, and for the last time, so those of you who say, God, he does that every time, he goes back over it, we really know it already, why does he do it? I just want to give you an idea of how much time we have really covered. Believe it or not, we in this course have covered, if you forget the early lesson about prehistory, we have covered about 1,700 years of history. In other words, about a little under half of the history of the Jewish people. If the Jewish people go back 3,800 years, we've covered about half that time. Let me review with you where we have been, and then I'm going to pause, and if there are any questions, we'll do that, then we'll go into tonight's session. The story of the Jewish people begins with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There is no way of accurately telling you exactly when they lived because there were nobody chronicling this at the time, but our best guess is sometime between 1500 and 1600 BCE. That was the time of what we call the patriarchs. From the time of the patriarchs till the time of the Exodus, we know this pretty clearly, a period of approximately 350 years passed, 210 years of Egypt, sojourning in Egypt, and the period of the patriarchs. About 1250 BCE, give or take, the Jewish people left Egypt. We left Egypt. We wandered in the wilderness for about 40 years. About the year 1210 or thereabouts, we came to the borders of the land of Israel. And right about 1210, I said 1200 to make it even. About 1200, we entered the land under Joshua, and the Jewish people in the year 1200 BCE took possession of the land of Israel. So between the time of Abraham, the patriarchs, and the time of the conquest of Canaan, a period of about 400 years passed. The next period of time, for the next 180 years, was the period of the judges. Israel was ruled by local officials and charismatic leaders, military leaders called the judges. That period went up till about the year of 1020. And beginning in the year 1020 BCE began the period of the three great kings of Israel. In 1020, we mark the beginning of the kingship of Shaul, Saul. In the year 1000, approximately, these are all approximate, we mark the beginning of the reign of King David. And then approximately 30 years after that period of time, in the year 970, we mark the beginning of the reign of King Solomon. So the entire period of time from Saul through Solomon is not all that long. It's from 1020 to 970. It's not all that long. It's a period of less than 200 years. Solomon continued to reign till 930. Till 930. And when he died, you will remember disunity sets in among the Jewish people. Jewish history is always marked by periods of coming together and being united, followed by periods of disunity. After Solomon died, his kingdom was divided up between the northern and southern tribes of Israel. And from the year 930, when Saul's rule ends, till about the year 586, both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judea both undergo destruction. So Israel doesn't last more than about 200 years, and Judah lasts a little bit longer than that. But in terms of the history of the Jewish people, by the year 586, end of the first temple, the temple that Solomon built, the end of the first Jewish commonwealth, the first Jewish kingdom, comes to an end. And Israel goes into what we talked about as being the period of subjugation to foreign empires. Now I'm going to take us a little further here. In 586, Jerusalem, the city, was conquered by the Babylonians, and the first temple was destroyed. About 50 years later, the Babylonians themselves fall to the empire of Persia, and the king of Persia, a man named Cyrus, gives the Jews permission to return in 539 BCE, to return to their city of Jerusalem, which had been destroyed by the Babylonians, to return to the areas of Judah and to reestablish again their independence in their old ancestral land with the recognition that they would still be subject to have to pay tribute to and recognize the overall authority of the Persian Empire. For the next period of years, Israel will have a certain degree of autonomy, of independence, but they will be always subject to a greater power. From 539 to 331, that power is Persia. In the year 331, you'll remember I told you that coming from out of the west for the first time, a new power arises. No more are we dealing with the old powers of the east. This new power is called Macedonia/Greece. It was led by a general, young man by the name of Alexander, the great Alexander of Macedon. And Alexander, in about the year 331, enters into and conquers Persia. And that begins the period of time we know as the Hellenistic period. The Persian Empire now gives way to what is called the Hellenistic Empire. And Hellenistic is just a fancy word for Greek. Okay, so when I say Hellenistic civilization or Hellenistic culture or Hellenist philosophy, I'm really speaking about the philosophy that comes from Greece and from the West. Even though it will be taken up by other peoples, the Hellenistic period is the period of Greek influence in the land of Judea, or the land that we know as Israel, or what you call Palestine, whatever you want to call it. During that period, next period of years from 331 on, the area is controlled by the Hellenistic Empire. You can break up that period into two separate periods. I already talked about the first one with you. In 301, after a period of going back and forth of the land of Israel being a plaything between the empires of Egypt under the Ptolemies and the empire of the Seleucids under of Syria under the Seleucids, I told you that it's beginning in 301 and continuing for about 100 years, Israel finds itself under the authority of the Ptolemies, the Hellenistic rulers, the Greek rulers, who trace from the general, Alexander's general Ptolemy. So it finds itself under Hellenistic rule coming from Egypt. That period lasts for 100 years, from about 301 till the period of about 200. It wasn't a long period of time. Israel's fate, or the land's fate, its history, is under the control of Egypt, the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Hellenistic dynasty. Something happens in the year 200 BCE. The Ptolemies, who for 100 years have maintained sovereignty over the land of Palestine, Judea, whatever you want to call it, Yehud, however you term it. After about 100 years, they lose control of the area to the kingdom to the north, the Seleucid kingdom of Syria. And the Seleucid kingdom takes over rule of Judea in the year 200 BCE. Now, I want to tell you that the Seleucid Empire doesn't last too long. Its rule doesn't last too long. It only lasts about 67, 70, 30 some odd years, less 40 years. That's all it lasts. Because the Seleucid Empire, the empire of the north, doesn't last very long for reasons we will discuss today. And then finally, just to complete the chart, and then I'm going to stop. The Seleucid Empire begins in the year 200 BCE. It is followed by the Maccabean Revolt in the year 167, about 33, 34 years later. The revolt goes on for a period of about 20 years until the Hasmonean dynasty takes over in the year 140 BCE. The Hasmonean dynasty lasts for 100 years, from 140 BCE to the year 37 BCE. What happens in 37? Very simply this: the fate of Palestine, of these areas, passes from Greece, from the Hellenists, it passes to Rome. Beginning in the year 37 BCE, this begins the period of Roman domination in the land of what we call Israel. I call it the Herodian period because for the first 30 years ago of that time, 40 years, the Romans ruled through a puppet king called King Herod. But the truth is, from 37 BC on, this began the Roman rule of the area. When Herod dies, eventually Roman takes over direct control over the land of Israel in the year 6 CE, about 40 some odd years after Herod's time. Rome takes over control. It controls the area for the next 6 decades until in the year 66 CE, the Jews make one more valiant but ultimately unsuccessful attempt to drive out and to destroy Roman rule. And this results in the calamity of the 2,000-year diaspora. The revolt against Rome, which begins in 66 CE, and amazingly enough, given how powerful Rome was, lasts a full 4 years. It takes Rome 4 full years to finally bring the Jewish rebellion in the land of Israel to an end. In the year 70, about 4 years after the revolt begins, Rome finally defeats the last cities that were involved in the revolt. Jerusalem was one of the last cities to fall. It falls in the years 70 CE. The Romans destroy the Second Temple, the end of the Second Temple period now. No more temples since then. That was the second exile. And Jewish life is pretty much decimated. You would think that you couldn't get any worse. It does get worse. The following century, in about the year 136, about 60 some odd years later, the Jews make one futile, gallant attempt to revolt against Rome, to defeat the powerful Roman Empire, and they fail miserably. That is called the Bar Kokhba revolt. And with the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the year 136 CE, that marks the end of Jewish national life or in the land of Israel. I will not tell you that no Jews lived in the land of Israel. Jews have always lived, small numbers in the land of Israel, but all Jewish national existence stops, if not by the year 70 CE, certainly by the year 136. All Jewish resistance is wiped out, and there is no longer any kind of political authority or autonomy or power left in Israel that belongs to the Jewish people. And from that period on begins, from the year 70 or so, begins a period of about 2,000 years of exile. 2,000 years of exile, a little bit less, actually, 1,900 and some odd years, begins a period of exile that will only end with the reestablishment of the modern state of Israel. So I'm going to pause right here. I'm going to get us out of this. I'm going to stop our share. I'm going to ask you a question. Okay, hopefully I'm back with all of you again. There we go. I'm just going to make sure I mute us all again. Okay. Although you're going to be able to unmute in just a second. That is the history of ancient Israel, from 1600 BCE to 136 CE, a period of about 17 or 1800 years. When you realize that all of Jewish history only lasted about 3,800, 3,700 years, that means we've covered half of Jewish history already. The period we covered was the happy part. The part when God first promises Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob a portion of the land, until the time when finally, at the end of that period, the Second Temple is destroyed, and the Jewish people now go into the terrible exile that was predicted by God, that was forecast, that was warned of by God in the book of Deuteronomy. And that exile lasted until after the period of the Holocaust, after the years 1945, and came to an end in 1948. Based on that ancient history of the Jewish people, my first question to you is, does anybody have any questions about any of that? And believing that perhaps you don't, did any of you find any of the were any of the periods informative to you? I know that you all know about the patriarchs, and I think that many of you know about the Exodus from Egypt, and you know about the conquest of the land and the period of maybe of the judges and the kings. But I'm interested, was any of the courses we've gone through, was it new information for you, Joseph?
A lot of it. I think the most interesting was understanding lost tribes of Israel. Paul and I had not known about the lost 10 tribes of Israel. We had not known about the separation of Judea and Israel and why they separated and how they separated. And the great question about what if they didn't separate, what could have happened? And the discussion about Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic period was totally new and totally fascinating.
Very good. Joseph, it's an interesting what if question. The question is, Jews who've been around for, say, from 1600 BCE, you would have thought with all of the inroads they made and all of the people who discovered Judaism during that time and the many generations of Jews who lived, there should be not billions of Jews today, not as many as China maybe, but there should be millions and millions and millions of Jews today. And when I tell you today, there are only about 16 million Jews in the world, Joseph, you would be right to say, Rabbi, what went wrong? How can we have gone through all those period of time? How could we have gone through 1800 years, given the fact that at one time, a good portion of the Roman world or the Western world was influenced by Judaism? How can we go from that to a time today, all these years later, when other populations have increased and the Jewish people is back down to 16 million? And the answer, Joseph, is between conquests and between lost tribes and between persecutions and between conversion, forced and otherwise, the Jewish people have lost a lot of numbers over the course of their years of history. God told the Jewish people long ago, I didn't choose you because you're the most numerous people of the world, because you're not, you're the smallest. We did not survive all these years, everybody, because we were the most mighty nation in the world. We were not, we were a relatively weak nation. We did not survive because we had the largest population. We had a very small population and we lived in a very small land. The amazing thing is that for all these years that there are still 16 million Jews that are still living in the world, you should be saying, how is that even possible? Because given the history of the Jewish people, I'm surprised that there are any Jews left in the world. And that would be more of the rational reaction. Not that why are there so few Jews, but given all of the calamities and the problems and the suffering that the Jews have faced over the course of their national existence, how did they manage to keep going? Why wasn't it true that at any point along the way, they just didn't throw up their hands and say, God, you know what? This chosenness business is all well and good, but we're returning the opportunity for you to choose another people. Why don't you find someone else? We don't think we can live through this choice any longer. The amazing thing is that God promised the Jewish people, so long as they remain faithful to his covenant, so long as they followed the Torah, that God would not abandon them, that despite the terrible things that the Torah predicted, despite all of the suffering that they would go through, despite the fact that they were among the most hated people for the longest period of time in the history of humanity, that they yet continue to endure. That is the miracle of Jewish life. Not that there are so few Jews, but there are any Jews today. Someone else had a hand. Larry, I think you had raised your hand. Something interesting you found. Jerry, I'm sorry, I said Larry. Jerry.
Yes, when you were talking about the significance of Alexander the Great and the Hellenistic period with them colonizing, now I began to appreciate, why the Bible did the transition to the common Greek of that era, because that Greek learning totally dominated that whole area, Egypt, the Middle East, Turkey, so forth.
Good observation, Jerry. If you want to know why the Jews managed to survive through a good portion of the ancient period, it was because they weren't colonized. If the Jews had been colonized from the very beginning of their history, we would not be speaking about the Jewish people today. The truth is, from the time they came to the land in the time of Joshua until the time their land was destroyed by the Babylonians and they returned under the Persians, the Jews didn't have a lot of other people who were living in their land. Other nations may have controlled their fate, but they did not settle or colonize the land of Israel. I think I told you last time, the great difference between the Hellenistic conquest and any other conquest that came before was that unlike previous conquerors who let the Jewish people by and large live in their land unmolested and undisturbed and maintaining their autonomy so long as they recognize the powers of those who were above them, that kept the Jews secure. The moment the Hellenistic period came, the moment that Alexander came, the year 331 approximately of the BCE, that was the year that Israel was not only conquered by, but was colonized by an outside force. And the first colonizers were the Greeks. It began with the Ptolemies in the year 200. It continued on all the way up until the time of the Seleucid Assyrians. And that colonization becomes more and more severe as time goes on. Now I will take us through our most recent part. I'll take us through in 15 minutes, the Seleucid period.
Rabbi Ron,
Sure, go ahead, Gary.
just to put a little something in perspective about what you were saying about the Jewish population being about 16 million people. We've heard this statistic before. Worldwide, that translates to approximately a range of 1/5 to 1/4%.
Yeah, well, if you want to know how small that population is, in the United States has what?
It's about 2.5 million.
2.5 million, 250 million, 3 million. China has whatever it has. Israel, 16 million people in the world. As Gary points out, that is not 1%. That is a fraction of 1% of the world's population. The amazing thing is that we even hear of Jews today at all. I could be talking about some kind of lost tribe in the Serengeti desert, or I don't know, is somewhere in Africa, who you never heard of before. Not only does Israel continue to exist, but it continues to be at the center of world affairs. The amazing thing, and you're right, Gary, is not only that given the fact that we're such a minuscule population in the world that anybody should even notice us, but that we find ourselves front and center in the major controversies and major issues of the time.
Yes.
So for whatever reason, God decided to keep us in the center of the story.
Yes, you had once made a comment, Rabbi Ron, that has stayed with me for quite some time. Many years ago, you said something to the effect, if there was a worldwide survey and the Jews were intentionally omitted, it would be a statistical indifference.
It would be a statistical blip. That is true. Jews, if they were completely not here in this world, would not even count, would be a statistical blip. And you would probably wouldn't make any 16 million people out of a world of, I forget how many billion for, but whatever, but how many billion people. It is an insignificant number. Thank God the contribution of the Jewish people has never been based on their power or their numbers. Now let me go on. I talked last week about what I call the Ptolemaic or the Egyptian Hellenistic period. For the first 100 years, from 301 till about the year 200, the Jews found themselves under the controls of the Ptolemies, and the Ptolemies were a relatively stable empire. I want to let you know that for 100 years, Jews under the influence of the Hellenists in Egypt lived a rather stable life. They had their autonomy. They were able to practice their religion while they had to pay tribute and recognize the authority of the Hellenistic kingdoms. They had a great deal of private freedom to live the cultural life that they wanted. For all this period, the Jews were able to go ahead and live their lives relatively normally, except for the fact that they no longer were an independent country. All that changes quite suddenly in the year 200 CE. In the period of 100 years, Israel, I'm going to use Israel because it's easier for me to use it wasn't it. Israel finds itself now under the rule of the northern Hellenistic kingdom, the kingdom of the Seleucids, which was based in Syria. And this kingdom was not stable whatsoever. If you want to know how Jews were able to live for 100 years relatively in stable conditions, and the next 40 years of their life was complete pandemonium, it was because the kingdom of the Seleucids, the empire of the Seleucids in the north, was completely fractious. Why was it fractious? Because unlike Egypt, which was one organic whole, when I say Egypt, you can picture Egypt sitting where it sits in the north of Africa. The empire of the Seleucids contained everything from Israel, Phoenicia, Syria, Iraq, all the way to the empires of the East. The empire of the Seleucids was multifaceted. It was not one kingdom, unlike Egypt. It represented many, many, many different kingdoms. So the problem that the Seleucids had was they were ruling not only over one nation or one people, they were ruling over a variety of nations, which made their job infinitely harder because they had to appease many kingdoms, many separate areas, and they had to keep peace among people who spoke different languages and had different religions and different customs. And the poor Seleucid Empire could not keep up with it. Though they tried to maintain the unity that had been established after Alexander's conquest of Asia, they were not able to do so. One of the reasons they were not able to do so was not only because the empire, the northern empires, the Seleucid Empire was so vast and varied, it was because Antiochus Antiochus III made the unfortunate mistake of attempting to make war against a power that was too great for him. Because what Antiochus attempted to do in the year 200, he attempted to go down and to enter Israel and to do a contest, go face to face with the Egyptian Ptolemaic Empire. He actually went in around that period of time, or shortly before or after the year 200, 201 BC. He actually enters Egypt. He actually enters the Nile Valley, and believe it or not, he gets so far as to almost conquer the Egyptian city of Alexandria. Okay, that's how close he came. Now, why didn't it work? At that point, Egypt's power base was slowly becoming more and more feeble. They weren't as agile. The leadership wasn't as acute, wasn't as apt as it used to be. The only reason that Antiochus did not conquer Egypt and then take over not only Palestine, but take over the Egyptian territories as well, is because Antiochus III was stopped in his attempt to conquer Egypt by another power. Do you know which power, anybody, that might have been? What power stopped Antiochus III from conquering the Ptolemaic dynasty? And I will tell you, you will be surprised, that power was known as Rome. A lot of you don't think Rome started that early, but Rome was already by this time a growing power. By the year 200 BCE, Rome was already a developing power in the Middle East. So strong, in fact, that when Antiochus III goes into Egypt and attempts to conquer it and take control of it, he is stopped in his tracks and told by the Roman Republic, in no soft, easy terms, that he better get out of there and get out of there quickly. He turns around, and in a great and ignominious defeat, he is forced to leave Egypt and give up his attempt to take over Egypt because Rome said, no go, you cannot do it. Rome, who was also playing a balancing game, tried to make sure that the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt and the Seleucid Empire in Syria were equally balanced. Rome didn't want either power to become too important. So how did Rome rule? It ruled the way it ruled all its history. It's called divide and conquer. You want to keep enemies at bay, force them to go into competition, into war with each other, divide them up, make sure they fall out amongst themselves and there's great conflict and tension between them, get them to expend all their energy fighting each other and keep them less dangerous to the power of Rome. Rome followed this policy for the first time about the year 200 when it told Antiochus I, who was ready to conquer Egypt, no, you will not conquer Egypt. We will enter the area if you force us to. And Antiochus ignominiously is forced to retreat back to the north. He manages to hold on to Palestine. That's why Palestine, or Israel, falls under his influence, but he is unsuccessful in conquering the Ptolemaic Empire. So here you have this situation where Antiochus III, this great general, he was a great general who could have conceivably defeated the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt, is stopped by the Romans. And as a result of the fact that the Romans said to him, stop, and he is forced to stop. It's not that he just said, okay, I'll stop. The Romans went out and they went to battle against him. He had to retreat. And as part of the retreat, after he loses the conflict with Rome, he is forced to pay indemnities or tributes to Rome. Not only is he forced to not conquer the land of the Ptolemies in Egypt, he is forced to go back to his own kingdom. And as part of the price he pays for having the audacity to even disturb the balance of power in the Middle East, he is made to pay a tremendous indemnity, a tremendous tribute, a tremendous price he has to give to the Roman Republic. Now, it's one thing to be beaten by an enemy. It's another thing to have yourself run, to turn tail and run away from an enemy and then have the enemy impose a tribute on you. Not only does this tribute force financial chaos in Antiochus's kingdom in the north, what it also does is it causes him to lose his prestige, whatever prestige he had among the kingdoms of the north. When he attempts to go into Ptolemaic Egypt, when he is stopped by the Romans, and when they essentially say, get out, go back, he loses influence throughout the rest of his empire in the greater Syrian northern area. So that the result of his attempt to conquer Egypt is that he must not only find himself paying a heavy tribute to Rome, but all of the prestige and all of the honor that his kingdom had been built up during the years before, he loses all that because he is seen as being essentially, he's seen as being defeated and chased off by this new power that no one really knows of, this power called Rome, which will become a very great power. Antiochus now is in a very bad position. His treasury is severely hurt. He has to pay this tribute to the Romans, but more than that, now that other kingdoms in his empire see that he's not invincible, they start to rebel against him. And suddenly one kingdom after another in Asia starts to rebel against Antiochus. One after the other, they go to war and they raise the formerly impervious, undefeatable kingdom of Assyria. The Seleucid Empire is now vulnerable. And a lot of people say, if the Romans can chase him out, he's got wooden legs, we can chase him out too. And slowly, from the period of 200 to about the period of 180, 170, he begins to lose influence throughout his empire. So much so that in an attempt to try and retain some control and retain some honor and to maintain some control over what is a deteriorating situation in his empire in the north, he attempts to secure his position by creating greater unity among the kingdoms of his empire. Antiochus says, Egypt beat us not only because of Rome, but they beat us because they were a unified area containing one people, the Egyptian people. I, Antiochus, rule over many, many nations, many, many different kingdoms. And if I am not successful, it's because I have to stretch out my armies over a vastly greater area than the Egyptians. And I have to divide my armies among many towns and many villages and many areas. And these people are challenging me, and it's costly and expensive and divisive. And the only way I'm going to be able to maintain unity in my kingdom is by getting everybody on board to do the same thing and form one kind of a kingdom. So Antiochus now not only spends a great deal of time taxing and laying monetary tributes on his individual kingdoms, he attempts to get them all to follow one series of laws. Up until then, Antiochus had been relatively moderate about allowing a certain degree of autonomy throughout the empire. But in the face of his defeat at the hands of the Romans in the year 200, Antiochus now realizes that he not only has to unify his empire through imposing one series of laws or rules for all the nations, but he has to bring these various nations under his control so that he can manage them more efficiently. He does the best that he can for the time that he has left. The time that he has left is only 107, is only until the year 176. It's only about another 25 years. When Antiochus III dies, he leaves his son, Antiochus IV, the villain of the Hanukkah story. He leaves Antiochus IV in power. Antiochus IV is much weaker than his father. Antiochus IV was not the general, was not the leader, was not the statesman that his father had been. But in addition to that, Antiochus IV came along 25 years after his father had already lost face and prestige and wealth to Rome, had already seen his kingdoms declining. And Antiochus IV came along at a point of time when the shell of the Seleucid Empire was beginning to crumble. And he didn't know what to do. So he attempted to do the following. He attempted to unify the empire by making it one whole empire. And how do you do that? Well, you do that by creating a common series of laws that all people will follow. We United States were 13 colonies. When we were 13 colonies, we didn't do too well as 13 colonies. Okay, even after we won the American Revolutionary War, and we had the Articles of Confederation, we didn't do too well as 13 separate states. United States realized at a certain point that the only way to unify the nation was to take these 13 separate states and unify them into one united country called the United States of America, which is what it did. Well, Antiochus, way back then, Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, realizes the same thing. In 176, he says, if my empire has any chance at all to survive, I must ensure that my empire is unified, which means, first of all, I got to tax it to make sure I have the money to do what I have to do and maintain my armies. But secondly, I have to create uniformity within my empire. And so what Antiochus does, even more than the Ptolemies before him, even more than his father, he colonizes the cities and the villages and the towns of Judea, and he brings in more and more Greek colonists. He brings in more and more foreign people. So Antiochus, in an effort to unify his neighborhood, tries to weaken the individual states by getting them all to fall under the authority, under the reign of authority of the Seleucid Empire. And what he does during that period of time, he increases the number of Greek towns and villages and settlements and increases the pace of Hellenization that I mentioned to you last week, which is already a problem in Israel. As it goes on, he becomes so greedy and so desirous of putting all opposition to an end, he actually starts involving himself personally in the affairs of the Jewish independent authorities in Jerusalem. The high priest in the temple during the time of Antiochus IV, a man by the name of Onias III, Antiochus wasn't happy with him. He wasn't compliant enough. He wasn't sympathetic enough. He didn't tax his people heavily enough. He wasn't as willing to Hellenize as fast as Antiochus IV wanted. So he replaces this high priest, this temple high priest, the temple high priest is the one in charge. He replaces him with the high priest's brother, a man whose name is Jason. Now you're going to say, Jason, that doesn't sound Jewish. Jason was already a Hellenized Jew. He was already a priest who was Hellenized. So Antiochus replaces the existing high priest, a man by the name of Onias, and he replaces them with another man of the house called Jason. And in return, Jason allows him to, he promises Antiochus he will increase the taxes on the Jews who are living in Jerusalem and Judea. He also, with a wink and a nod, suggests that Antiochus can go into the treasury in Jerusalem, the temple in Jerusalem, and take money out of the treasury in order to support himself, because Antiochus was having a tremendously hard economic problems at that time, keeping his army intact. He allowed him to take monies from the temple in Jerusalem. He even guaranteed Antiochus that he would continue on a faster pace than had been the case, the Hellenization of Judea and the city of Jerusalem. It got so bad that this high priest Jason proposed to turn the city of Jerusalem, the center of Jewish life, into a Greek polis. And he was going to rename it Antiocha. Now, he was going to name it after Antiochus himself. He was not going to be called Jerusalem anymore. He was going to complete the process of Hellenization. He was going to allow the further development of Greek civilization in the capital city itself. And he proposed to name this capital no more Jerusalem, but Antiocha or Antiocha. Well, you can imagine the people, including the priests and all the population, are not very happy with this. In addition to all of those concessions that he was willing to make to Antiochus, he also joins in increasing the pace of Hellenization of the city of Jerusalem and of the towns and villages in the land of Judea. So much so that the Hellenization proceeds at a frightening pace. And when even he, Jason, proves a little recalcitrant and a little unwilling to go as far as Antiochus wants, Antiochus replaces him with another man who wasn't even from the priestly family, a man by the name of Menelaus, not a Jewish name. He replaces him by a man named Menelaus as high priest. And Menelaus, in order to gain his position, makes all kinds of extremely unsettling promises to Antiochus IV, saying that if you make me high priest and if you guarantee my position, I will make sure that you can take over Jerusalem and that you can take final control over the land of Jerusalem and the surrounding area of Judea. Well, it was a bridge too far. And one more event occurs that causes this whole house of cards to fall down. Antiochus IV decides he is going to try what his father did. He decides he is going to also try to invade Egypt again. His problem is that Egypt is too close to the land of Israel, Palestine, Syria, whatever you want to call it. And he is afraid that the Ptolemies are going to try and take back Palestine, Syria, Phoenicia. And as a matter of fact, the Ptolemies do attempt to do that. The Ptolemies do start out, make an attempt to try and reconquer the area. Well, Antiochus will have absolutely none of that. He immediately sends his army south again, like his father did, into the area of Egypt. But he doesn't even get as far as his father got. As he is approaching Egypt, like his father, he is warned by the Romans, turn around and back up. And even more, he suffers an even more ignominious defeat than his father. And he is forced in shame and at great personal cost and expense, at further humiliation, he is forced to retreat back. But he is so angry at what has happened to him at the hands of the Romans. He is so angry at his loss of power in the eyes of the nations above whom he had sovereignty, that he decided he's going to punish countries along the way. And one of the countries he punishes on his return from the land of Egypt, he goes to Jerusalem, he stops in Jerusalem, and he raids the temple treasury, and with the aid of Menelaus actually steals large portions of the temple treasury in Jerusalem. Well, that's it. That's the final straw. Things were bad enough as it was. But now you're losing power, you're losing influence. Countries in your empire are rebelling. You've lost the second war against Egypt. You have been shown to be a failure. And now you cap that all off by going into the temple, violating its sanctity, violating the autonomy of the priests, and attaching large parts of the temple treasury. He was asking for trouble. At that point, he didn't care anymore. He had determined that the only way he was going to maintain control in Judea, in that area of his land, he was going to impose his own law over Judea, and that meant a law of persecution. He had determined that he was going to do away with Judaism in the land of Palestine. He was going to once and for all forbid the practice of Judaism in the areas that were left to the Jewish people. The Jewish people will put up with a lot. They're willing to swallow a lot of abuse. They are willing to pay tribute. They are willing to make sacrifices. They are willing to give up their plans for future glory and autonomy and whatnot. But you start pushing their noses to the ground and committing acts that publicly disgrace them, and then you turn around and you attempt to obliviate their religion, to forbid their following the laws of their ancestors. That was a step too far. And the result was Antiochus, who begins this process around the year 170, 3 years later, finds himself in a war with not the Romans anymore, not with the Egyptians in Ptolemaic Egypt. He finds himself in a war with this little people in this little kingdom of Judea. And the amazing thing is that despite the fact that he is the head of an empire, the Seleucid Empire, despite that he has many, many forces and better armed forces and better equipment and better situations in many ways than the Jews of Jerusalem, he will proceed in the next few years to lose that war. He will lose that war because of the disunity in his own kingdom, and because like so many times in the past, when the Jewish people find themselves pushed up to the brink with nowhere to turn and no choices left, will suddenly become obstinate and suddenly will become zealotous in their behavior. They will suddenly say, so far and no more. And Antiochus, not anticipating the force he has let go, releases the forces of the Maccabees, who turn around, and over a period, it wasn't a quick period of time, it was a series of continual defeats, but it was slow defeats. From the period of about 167 to about the year 150, a period of about 17 years, Antiochus and his armies are driven out of the land of Israel. Early on, he suffers the loss of Jerusalem. Early on, the Jews retake the temple, which Antiochus, I will tell you next week, took over and attempted to turn into a pagan shrine. They will rededicate their temple in a holiday called the Festival of Hanukkah. They will do the impossible. This small, little, insignificant nation who hadn't been independent until they had been conquered by the Babylonians in 586, this small, insignificant kingdom will finally defeat the Syrian Empire under Antiochus and will finally reestablish their autonomy in the land of Israel. And that story and what happens after that is what I will share with you next week. All right. Don't have a lot of time, but if you want any questions. Oh, yes, sure. I'm going to unmute us. I'm going to unrecord us for a second here.
And record or stop recording?
Cancel. On the recording, yeah. I think I did it. I didn't. Hold on. Stop recording. Yes. Okay.